And let's talk about one of the most controversial werewolf. It has to be the most controversial werewolf film there is. I've been thinking a lot about transformations recently in horror, and in light of the new Wolfman film, I thought we could go through and talk about a lot of different looks there are within the genre or subgenre or micro genre. Even though werewolves are a huge topic, everyone knows what a werewolf is, there aren't a lot of werewolf films. Today I picked a bunch of different ones, and ones you guys also recommended in a community post. I thought it'd be a good idea just to concentrate on transformations of werewolves themselves so we can compare and contrast. And I wanted to give a huge shout out to Spider-Boy, who hangs out in my Twitch streams, for inspiring me to make this video. Oh my god, that is such a good idea, Spider-Boy. I'm not even joking. I'm gonna write that down. I will be discussing all the films listed and spoilers, obviously, of the werewolf, the look of the werewolf, and the transformation scene. So be warned. I am going to throw in the new Wolfman at the very end, but I will not be giving spoilers for that because it's a very new film. I have provided chapters for you so you can skip around if you do want to skip one out. But I think we're about to have a lot of fun, so stay tuned. Okay, the tiers. Perfection. It's the top of the top. It doesn't need any explanation. From here we have Let's Go, that moment in a horror movie where you see an exciting, not perfect, but an exciting transformation and you're ready to see what else is to come. So obviously a step down from perfection. I decided not to put in too many tiers for this one because I feel like it would just make it too easy to put them a step down from each other. So straight from Let's Go, we go, there was an attempt. Again, self-explanatory. It was an attempt. They tried. Did they fail? And then the last one is Hi Doggy, and this is a reference to the infamous The Room, which is known as one of the worst films on earth. If you haven't watched The Room, it is so worth checking out. But there's a famous random moment, which the whole film is made up of random moments, where there is a dog sitting there and he says, "Hi doggy." So for this tier, the bottom tier, I'm basically comparing the wolf to this vicious diva. The shade of it all, but also just such a fun play on words. Okay, so starting off with a cult classic, Gingersnaps, which wasn't really appreciated when it first was released. Many rentals later, I don't know how many times you guys rented this film out from Blockbuster. It became a big component of 2000s horror movies. It is about two death-obsessed sisters who are outcasts in their suburban neighborhood, and they must deal with tragic consequences after one of them is bitten by a deadly werewolf. So this is Catherine Isabel, and the film is amazing. I'm gonna try and focus on just the werewolf look, not the film itself, which is really hard to do, but I'm gonna try. But when I was looking into the details of this one, I didn't realize that Natasha Lyonne was offered the main role in this film, which I think is very interesting. But the director of the film, John Fawcett, refused to have CGI in this film as the transformation, opting for the creature special effects to be all makeup and prosthetics, which I know Catherine Isabel had a really hard time with adjusting to. I might be speaking for myself, but I think a lot of people remember her throughout the film slowly changing, but the actual transition scene of this film is quite short and quite sharp and is quite sad. It's a very horrific looking scene and a lot of texture I love. It's kind of wet looking and it makes you feel a little bit slimy and it's gross. It's gross. It's a gross werewolf transition, which I'm actually really into. I would have loved to see some more, but I understand sometimes more is less, especially with the budget constraints and using just props. So I really give them props for that. The final look of the werewolf is quite terrifying, even though a lot of it is in the dark. And we will talk about this a lot because some of these films do werewolves in broad daylight and some really utilize the darkness. I love it. Let's Go for me. I don't think it's perfection, but I definitely think Let's Go. This is one of, I love the film, so it's hard for me not to talk about the film, but I love the film. And I think that the transition is good. I would have liked some longer sequences, but what they kept in is very effective. From here we have The Howling. We have The Howling and American Werewolf in London, and the history between these two films that were released in the same year is really interesting. So The Howling is about a newswoman who is sent to a remote mountain resort where the residents may not be what they seem. And I should mention, we're just talking about this first film. We do have a sequel in this lineup, but we're just talking about the first film here. I guess I should have said that in Gingersnaps as well, but this is just purely based on the first film and the look of the werewolf. So Rick Baker, who we'll talk about a bunch in this video, he is very well-known special effects, makeup effects artist within the industry and changed a lot to do with werewolves. But he went on to this film, and this is before he really blew up, but he was then offered the role of American Werewolf in London and left this role to take that. But he left it in good hands because he left it in his assistant's care, which is Rob Bottin, who went on to do some of the special effects in The Thing. It is a little bit disheartening that The Howling was overshadowed by American Werewolf in London because they did have two very different approaches to the look. He had been in talks with the director and producer, and he said, quote, "When we started the picture, the director and producer and myself didn't want to do the picture unless we could do something different with it." And I think that they really achieved that. This is what I call the bulge. So Bottin decided for the transformation scene to use what they call air bladders under the latex on the face. And they decided to make the human nose a prosthetic that stretches out into the muzzle. But the best part of it for me is the shaking, the vicious movement of the jaw, like it's a real dog that's there and like ready to go, all worked up. It's so dangerous and menacing. It's my favorite part. But I will say the rest or some of the shots of the werewolf and the reveal after that, I'm trying to focus more on the transformation scene, but I feel like they kind of ruin it in a way. This shot not too long later, like why did we do that? It was so scary. And just this moment here is terrifying to me. I wish they focused more on that. Less is more. But fantastic, absolutely fantastic. It's hard for me to put this in between perfection and Let's Go, but I will say it's more... It's still Let's Go. I'm still gonna give it Let's Go. Okay, An American Werewolf in London. I had to put these side by side so we can talk about them and compare and contrast because it's so interesting that they kind of started off, and sorry, Rick Baker is still credited as a consultant in The Howling because they basically started off all the planning together and then he went to American Werewolf in London. And so it's really interesting to see the differences in these transformations, because the other one hides in the shadows in moments, and we talked about the reveal, but this one is in broad daylight, and that was a big part of the approach for this film. So American Werewolf in London is about two college students, Jack and David, who are best friends and are on a walking tour across Britain. But one night they are attacked by a werewolf. David recovers, but Jack dies. Obviously, the film is fantastic. I've got it out of the way. I've said it. It's funny to know as well, I almost put this in here, but Rick Baker, who did the special effects for this one, or was the head of the special effects department. I should say a lot of people obviously go in to create this. It's not just one person's name that should be on it. But he also did Michael Jackson's Thriller, so you can credit him for that werewolf transformation as well. But back to American Werewolf. He said that this is based on his dog Bosco, which I thought was quite interesting. I hope your dog's okay. But he was very ambitious with his model and how he was going to create this werewolf transformation. He decided to do it in full light, fully lit, no shadows that could hide flaws in makeup or mechanics. And interesting enough, a lot of people talk about the painful aspect of watching this. It's meant to feel like he's in pain, and that's meant to be part of the transformation. A lot of other werewolf films, they don't seem like they're in pain. They feel like they're kind of keeping the wolf within, and the transformation is them finally letting out the beast. This one is completely different in terms of the fear and the breaking of the bones and listening to that as you're watching someone stretch out. And that was the idea behind the whole movie. Before they had even finished the script, the director told Baker that he wanted to make a werewolf film where you could see someone's pain and suffering when transforming. And I'm gonna spoil a little bit of the movie magic here, but parts of this iconic sequence with their hair growing was actually done in reversed, where they had full hair and then they trimmed it shorter and shorter to make it appear like it's growing. It's like a magician. Sometimes it's the easiest tricks that really fool your brain when you're watching it, and it looks so powerful. It's really amazing hearing Rick Baker talk about this film, because if you didn't know, he went on to win an Oscar for this, and it was the first time that an Oscar was awarded to makeup and special effects. They were always acknowledged, but this was the first award. But when he talks about it, he talks about all of the things he would do different. He picks apart different aspects. He says it's pretty decent, but he doesn't really call it perfect or anything like that. I just felt that was really interesting in Hollywood. Someone who got an Oscar for something they did on a film still had no ego about it, which I thought was pretty cool. And he actually hired a crew of his fans, people who had written him fan mail, to come in and help him and assist him on this set, because at the time, this was one of his first big films. He said there was no one who really specialized in this kind of stuff. You couldn't look for a lot of assistance, so he hired his own. Obviously, it all paid off. It's one of the best, if not the best, I'm gonna have to put it all the way up from perfection, transformations of a werewolf. It is thrilling. It makes my skin crawl hearing him scream out in agony, and the visuals to go with it, how much time and dedication. The film as a whole, I'm gonna try and stop saying this, but the film as a whole is amazing. And this is just a small part of all of the great special effects and makeup that goes into the whole story. We have to concentrate on the transformation, and I think it's one of the best. But it's in good company, because the company of wolves. So Christopher Tucker was named as the special effects head of department, makeup special effects for this one. And he also is known for The Elephant Man, which David Lynch, I can't even talk about it, but that is my favorite David Lynch film and absolutely amazing. So there are a few different transformations in this film because it's kind of an anthology. It's basically stories linked into a dream sequence, and it's about a girl who falls asleep and is transported into a strange land where her grandmother tells her stories about the dangers of men and werewolves. I think it's only fair to talk about the first story where there is just an epic and very different transformation scene. And this is the story of a groom who disappears on his wedding night, and it's hinted that wolves take him. Later, his bride has remarried and started a new family when he reappears. And in a chilling sequence, he realizes that his wife, his bride that he left that night, has remarried and has other children, and the beast within explodes out. It's a very sequence. I can't show you too much on YouTube, but it's very different because of the way it shows the anatomy and all of the layers. It's possibly the most, and I'm trying to be careful because I get censored a lot now, and it really just goes to the beat of its own drum. It's very effective and very off-putting, but also shocking. This is what people are looking for in newer horror movies, and it's just not there, where there is a total different way of showing a transformation. It's so bizarre that all of these films from the 80s were able to accomplish this, and there's still not really any new unique spin on the werewolf since then, and since the technology has changed so much. Because although practical effects are making a resurgence and people are turning away from CGI, especially with everything to do with AI at the moment, practical effects are absolutely king, and horror fans do prefer them. They date a lot better as well. And it's so crazy that these three films, at least, American Werewolf in London, The Howling, and The Company of Wolves, have such effective transformations. But since then, can you name one that is a werewolf that hasn't been as chilling, or I guess more as unique? I don't know if I'm missing one, and I'd love if I was. Please let me know in the comments, but I just don't think anything adds up to this, and I would put The Company of Wolves as perfection. There are so many other transformations in this film, and there's one that happens towards the end, which is on the cover, which shows a full wolf just emerging from a man's mouth, and it is stunning. The fact that they have more than two very stunning and different, unique transformations in one film, it is fantastic. It's as good as werewolf films come. Speaking of, let's go back to where it all started, the Wolfman. This is the original 1941 Universal monster Wolfman. So Jack Pierce did the special effects, and Lon Chaney Jr.'s performance shaped werewolf lore in pop culture from this film. The film is about Larry, who returns to his family's home in Wales. Here he tries to save a woman who is being attacked by a werewolf, but in turn is bitten. The transformation scene uses time-lapse photography and frame-by-frame makeup application, and it required Chaney to sit for over 5 hours, which is crazy for how quick the shots are. The director, George Wagner, used dissolved transitions to show the transformation. It was a pain of a process, but it was normalized or became industry standard, I guess is better to say, for years to come. This one is so hard because of the technology of the time. They didn't have anything better to work with, and what they were doing was revolutionary. So do I adjust for that? But then it makes no sense because the 80s was such a peak, and then we all go downhill. And trust me, I'm going to judge a lot more modern films that had better access to technology. I'm going to judge them harsher, so don't worry about that. I'm not going to put it in high doggy. I don't want to say there was an attempt, because I do think, consider it was, it's on film and the way they put it together, I do think there's more than that. I just don't think that they had anything else to really make it. It's really hard. You know what? I'm going to put in let's go. We'll adjust later if we feel we need to at the very end. I really wish I could hear what you guys think. Do you think we should put it in let's go, or there was an attempt? Scream it. Scream right now. I'm trying to hear you guys from the past. Oh, I think I can hear you say there was an attempt. You guys are harsh. Okay, from there, we're going to go to The Wolfman, which is basically a full remake of the original The Wolfman. We have so many wolves and so many men over the years, but this one is the same storyline. So when his brother goes missing, Lawrence returns to his father's ancestral home. However, he sets out to find his brother's killer and discovers a horrifying destiny for himself. This film has a really interesting background as to what happened. So let's look at the clips first. I am kind of speechless from this, I have to say. I remember seeing this in the cinema when it came out, and I enjoyed it. I don't actually have a problem with this film at all. I think for its time, it was really interesting and fun. It's the flat face in this shot where he is in the chair, tied to the chair, that really... I know that they were making way, I guess, for the muzzle to grow. That was a huge trend in the 80s films of the 80s werewolf look, but there is just something about that CGI there that dated really poorly. So the production of this film began as a passion project for Benicio del Toro. He was a fan of the original, and this is so sad because Rick Baker was originally signed on for this film, and he created a whole set of original plans and ideas. But the director is said, this is all talk in Hollywood, it's said that he was too indecisive with what to do and how exactly he wanted to approach the Wolfman in this film. And he was so indecisive that he ended up leaving, and then a new director stepped in. And this was Joe Johnston. And although by this time, Rick Baker had finalized the idea and the look and all of the components for the Wolfman, they decided against it. This would not be the last time you've heard of this in Hollywood too. It gets really bad as we go on. The filmmakers decided to incorporate CGI instead, and a lot of people have said it clashes with the gothic tone of the film, which I would totally agree with. The Wolfman is a gothic horror movie, and it barely gets that label anymore. There was still a collaboration between Rick Baker's team and the CGI department, but I guess they just didn't meet common ground. We'll never know, but what came out? It doesn't look like it. I have complicated feelings towards this one. I don't think it's horrendous. I feel like there has to be a CGI The Wolfman somewhere, and it didn't hit the mark, but I'm gonna say there was an attempt. It's the flat face that gets me. I don't think it's horrible though. I really don't think it's horrible. For its time, I remember seeing that in the cinema and not having a problem with it, but looking back, there's a problem. We were all so complacent, I feel like. Okay, this is not a horror movie, but where would I be if I didn't throw in some fun here? Twilight, New Moon. This is the first time we see Jacob's transformation. I'm gonna say that in quotes. In a Twilight film fully on screen. I have watched all of the Twilight films. I actually did a commentary track for my Patreon years ago. I had never seen the Twilight films before. Shout out to my patrons who get bonus videos every single week, or bonus content like commentary tracks. By the way, this was requested. I did not do this at my own will. But poor them, they had to listen to several hours of me snort laughing into a mic. I'm a new Twilight consumer, and I love what it did for pop culture, and I also love the commitment to the bit, because although this film uses complete CGI, and let's look at it again, the transformation's so fast you might not see it. It's a blink of an eye. It's a magician's trick. The commitment to having the stand-ins for this role for her to do the reaction shots. Honestly, that deserves an award. And I do want to say, wait, technically, he's not even a werewolf. He's a shapeshifter, I guess, in the books, but we're just going visually here. He's known as a werewolf icon in modern pop culture, and I would be doing it a disservice not to put it on here. Obviously, he's going in high doggy. That is not against anything you guys love in Twilight, okay? I really respect people who go hard for Twilight. I think it's really cool, but it is giving, there is no difference between these two photos. Okay, Teen Wolf. Again, this one is not horror, but I thought it's a really fun, different look. And what I love about this werewolf transformation is it's also done in daylight. This is a teen comedy about an ordinary high school student that discovers his family has an unusual pedigree, and of course, it is Michael J. Fox. The film was only made in 21 days, which is astounding. I had no idea that was the case, and this scene was shot last. And the tone, I also think, is very important to the context of the situation, because the director, Rod Daniel, claimed parts of the look were meant to be cheesy as part of the charm. I think this is really interesting because it's a very simplistic idea of a werewolf, especially a teen werewolf, but it has the bubbling under the skin. So this is, for me, a callback to the Howling and the idea of how they put that together. This was created by Teresa M. Austin and Jeff Dawn. There's a couple of interesting ways they approached this scene. Number one, they did it with a mirror shot, which is really smart when it comes to revealing self-reflection, the idea of him and his identity, but also hiding, cutting around. The transition happens very fast and is easily hidden without it being jarring with reverse shots. But I will give them, they did full light, no shadows, and it's kind of still fun. I think that this one is a let's go for sure. I don't feel like they tried to complicate it. And the idea is it's not meant to be scary. So we're going through these, and usually you would find the scariest ones go up the top, but with this, I think it has to do with the context and approach. And although we're not taking the film and how I feel about the film into focus here, it's still gonna blend in with the tone of the film. I think it's pretty good. They're not trying to overdo it. There's a lot of talk about when you reveal monsters in films and how much you reveal, and you have to be very aware of what your audience is expecting for that. If they're going into a comedy, they don't want a scary reveal. Okay. I'm about to make some enemies. Guys, Van Helsing. I am not a fan, unfortunately. I do, again, respect people who adore these kinds of films. They're just not for me, and that's totally fine. But the transformation for this film is very interesting. It happens towards the end, so again, there's spoilers for this one. I know I've already given a spoiler warning, but I hate doing spoilers, but it has to be done for this video. So this is another blink or you'll miss it. But what I do appreciate about this is the actual approach to the idea behind him kind of basically coming out of his own skin, almost breaking out of his shell. So the film is about the famed monster hunter who is sent to Transylvania to stop Count Dracula, who's using Dr. Frankenstein's research and a werewolf for nefarious purposes. So the director-writer said that he chose to purposely avoid the idea of the werewolf growing from a human into the werewolf. So it's not the transformation we're used to. Instead, he wanted to go with the beast within idea. When I say that, that's just like a coin term, not the actual film, The Beast Within. It's the idea of ripping off your human skin to show who you really are underneath. So the idea is he's wearing a human suit and he's not transforming into a werewolf. Instead, the beast is already there. It's just breaking out. So for that, I like it. Again, interesting context, but watching the film, all this shot, it's so quick. It's so quick. And how cool would it have been if they slowed it down and had it like piece by piece? They could have incorporated practical effects. Unfortunately, this is not that kind of film. It's CGI everywhere, all over this film. This is just a very minor part of what happens in this film, or even a theme. But I won't be really mean. I do think that there was an attempt. I think there was an attempt. That's actually quite nice. I didn't think I was going to put it there. I don't know, actually. Is it a bit of high doggy? Let's look at it again. Yeah, you know what? I'm being way too nice. It's a high doggy for me. I know a lot of you guys love this film. I promise it has nothing else to do with this film, but I can't put it in. There was an attempt when it goes for 1 second, because what attempt is that? It feels like it wasn't an attempt. They kind of just threw it in afterwards. They could have done something really cool with that. Just a couple of cutaway shots. I'm not even asking for much. Okay, the next one, we're going to talk about Trick or Treat, which is another anthology film. Again, I shouldn't have to say this, and I hate that I'm saying this, and I know I don't have to say this. It's just me. But this film is really cool to watch the first time and not know what's happening. So it kills me that we're going to talk about the werewolves in this, but I think it's important. So again, spoiler if you do want to skip this chapter. This is an anthology horror film with 5 different stories, and one is about werewolves, but it doesn't seem like it is, which makes it really cool. This story is about a woman who is dressed as Little Red Riding Hood on Halloween night and has plans with her friends. This was another one that's actually quite graphic, so I can't show you everything, especially because there's some mild as well. And it's kind of perfect to come after the last one we were talking about, because this is a short story and yet it gives us a longer transition than the last film we talked about, but it is quite quick and snappy. But what I really love is the after effect and how we see it in the full form, I guess, at the end. It looks like a dog, it looks like a wolf. I just think that that practical aspect is really cool, but this is the marriage of CGI and practical effects for sure. It also utilizes an erratic scene where we're kind of going in between different attacks at the same time. So there is a lot of variety in what we're seeing. We get the close-ups at the start and then the tiny little transformation in the face, but there's not a huge transformation. But I just really loved the full wolf of this film, not so much the transformation part. So I'm gonna put this one in There Was an Attempt. I do think it's solid and it's fine for what it delivers, but I would have loved a little bit longer of the actual transformation, because what they have at the end and what they've built with the wolves, it looks so realistic and very cool. I just wanted the little bit of morphing, just a little bit more. Okay, next is Wolf. This is Jack Nicholson. And honestly, this is so different to the other films here because it really relies on his performance and his facial acting, which I thought was a really interesting topic to talk about. So after being bitten by a wolf, a former senior editor finds himself a changed man and he's ready to take back what he thinks is rightfully his. And guess what, guys? This is Rick Baker, but it's him turned all the way down. There's a couple of transformations on multiple people in this film, but none of them are really direct. But let's focus on Jack Nicholson because it relies so heavily on his facial acting and his convincing that he is a wolf. And I guess that's the dip between wolf and man in this one, which is very on par with Teen Wolf, I would say. It's simplified, it's stripped back. He doesn't really turn into a full-on werewolf, but instead he inhabits those features. And Jack Nicholson was so well casted in this because he does have those devilish kind of features. I just wanted to show all of the different styles of werewolf, and this is definitely a stripped back one for more of a thriller horror. I'm gonna say there was an attempt with this one. I do think Jack Nicholson really sells it, but for a werewolf, it's not my favorite. But things only got worse from here. And let's talk about one of the most controversial werewolf. It has to be the most controversial werewolf film there is, which is called Cursed. So Rick Baker is credited on this film. If you watch it, his name comes up at the start in the credits for his special effects makeup on this movie, but he is pissed that his name's there. The title Cursed is really ironic because this is truly a cursed movie. So many of you guys probably remember this one as being the Christina Ricci werewolf film, but also stars a young Jesse Eisenberg, which I totally did not realize when going back. And it also has Joshua Jackson, Portia de Rossi, and Maya. It's about 2 siblings whose lives are turned upside down when a werewolf attacks them, and they start to realize that the werewolf in question may be someone they know. It's a great premise, and on top of that, it's also set in Hollywood, and a lot of it is set on the soundstage with Universal Monster props, and they highlight a lot of Wolfman ones. And here's another kicker. It's directed by Wes Craven, so it feels very meta like Scream, or attempted to be very meta like Scream. I'm gonna say it, it's kind of like Stab, the idea of a werewolf film within a werewolf film, and also the predatory nature of werewolves and being in Hollywood. It feels like it's a comment on that, but if you knew everyone who was involved in this film and how it changed, it's just such an ironic situation. So Wes Craven set out to change the werewolf genre, but this film was drastically altered by producer interference, rewrites, and CGI replacing the practical effects, which downgraded it to a PG-13 rating. On the Joe Rogan podcast, I can't believe how many words I'm saying right now, I never thought I would on my channel, but that podcast had Rick Baker on. He said it was a mess of a film, and he was basically talked into making the movie and regretted it immediately. They started filming without a script being finished. He was promised full creative control, and during every step of the production, he was denied that. The film actually got shut down. It was such a mess, and he went on to do another project. And when you look up the makeup and special effects department, it is immense. There's so many people who worked on this film. It bombed so hard for how many names there are, but that's because people picked up what little elements they had left of his design, and then they just completely changed it. So many hours of so many people, talented people's time just thrown away. There are a few werewolf sightings in the film, but none of them are consistent, which is really interesting. But with what we know, it makes complete sense. This is the most visible transformation scene. I'm gonna say, with knowing the backstory of the film, it makes sense, but it's a swing and a miss. And not knowing the backstory, it's a swing and a miss. I'm gonna say something very Australian. This looks like a koala, a drop bear at best, not even a drop bear. This is one of the worst. It really is. Sometimes it's really nice when films go through hardship and they still shine from all the people who worked on it on the other side, but I just feel like it didn't get there for me. And no wonder. Like, the script wasn't even finished when they started. It was doomed from the start. The next film is really interesting. I wasn't gonna put in any sequels because I just feel like it's unfair and silly, but I do have a soft spot. All my biases are coming through for American Werewolf in Paris. And I'm gonna tell you right now, if you don't think people who watch film had biases, that's all we have. And I owned this on VHS on tape, if that's better for you guys to hear. Obviously, looking back, it's not the best film. I'm not claiming that. But I thought I'll put it in here because it's going to be really funny to address the look and the transformation of the werewolf. Looking back, it's not that bad at all. Talking about films that sit in American Werewolf in London Shadow, that's literally American Werewolf in Paris. So the animatronics and the prosthetic effects for this film were created by Magicon and Crawley Creatures. And this is about Andy, a tourist who falls in love with a woman after rescuing her from a potential fatal fall off the Eiffel Tower. I told you the story is not... It's just so cliche. Where did she fall from? The Eiffel Tower, duh. It's set in Paris. Where else would she fall from? Anyway, she's saved. They start a relationship, but soon he learns that she has a dark secret. So the werewolves in the film also have a different approach. They're meant to be a mix of lions, bears, wolves, dogs, and humans, which is very ambitious. The director, Anthony Waller, said that when the creature moves, you can see its skeleton and structure. The skin moves over the muscles and the hair flows naturally, with longer and shorter strands moving independently. I'm not exactly seeing that translated onto screen. And being fair, we have kind of looked at only one transformation from each film to keep it equal. And although I don't feel like it shows the great detail of the individual hairs, it does at the knees. But what I love about this transformation scene is the way it trails down the body. I've had to cut out a little bit because it is a woman. But the eyes, it's giving Reagan. It's very possessed, and I'm not against that. I think it's really cool that they did something completely different with her look, and the way that she transforms from someone so delicate to a monster, I absolutely love. Look, we do have a significant amount of transformations of women turning into other beings. Jennifer's Body, When Animals Dream, Tiger Stripes is a very recent one. And I guess some of them can be looked at as werewolves, but I just really appreciate how grotesque her face looks in this. And it does give Reagan vibes for me, which I just really appreciate. I just feel like it's a different kind of approach to the werewolf. And I'm really glad they did something completely different for this film. Looking back, I expected this to be horrendous. Even though I used to watch this film all the time, looking back, you know, so many years later, 20 years later, I expected this to be horrendous, and it's really not. It's really hard for me because I want to put this in Let's Go, And I didn't expect that, but also it's because of this scene, or this shot really. The full werewolf that we see throughout the film isn't as cool as this shot, but this shot is fantastic. I'm actually gonna put it in Let's Go. Let's reassess at the end. I'm putting it all the way up there. I don't care. Okay, Dog Soldiers. This is another beloved film, absolutely beloved. And this approach is different again. This is an action horror film. It's about a British squad on a training mission in the Scottish wilderness, and they discover a wounded special forces captain and his team. The film is choppy as hell. It's an action horror, so that's to be expected, but they utilize that in the best way possible to keep it very mysterious. I would say that this might be the most mysterious werewolf out of all of these. They have one iconic shot of the werewolf towering over with the shadow in the room, and the height and power that just this image, just this still alone exudes. They do very well to keep the mystery element alive and not show too much of the werewolf throughout, I guess, like the first 3/4 of the film. We do get a reveal transformation, and again, they do this in a very clever way. We do see a couple of close-up shots and elements, but then he falls underneath the table and comes back or leaps back as a full werewolf. There's also this very menacing shot where he's face to face with just the wolf's face, and it doesn't show the whole body. But I do think it's good that they only show what is 100% terrifying and they cut away from the rest, so you can't be mad that they're doing it in a strategic way. I actually think, even though I don't love this movie, I do think they do the werewolf in a very interesting way. And I don't have any qualms about that aspect at all. Okay, I did add the Wolfman in here. I'm not going to show any clips because I know it's a new film and I don't really want to talk about the look of it, which is against the purpose of this. But I did want to put it in here because I know a lot of you will comment, where does the Wolfman go? All I want to say is that the transformation of the Wolfman in this movie was not my favorite part of it by far. I was fine with that though. I really didn't expect anything more. And I will say, after doing this thought experiment of this tier ranking, I do think there is room, and this could have been the film, to get an updated, more unique stylization of a werewolf. I don't know why the 80s are still holding gold to the werewolf and everything else just cannot get up that far. Like, we can't even go on par with the 80s right now. What is happening? I'm gonna put there was an attempt for this one. I don't think it's bad, but I do think there's other aspects of Wolfman, the 2025 film, that are much better than the look of the wolf. The look of the wolf is not my favorite. Okay, let's look at this. I'm actually gonna adjust something straight away. I'm gonna put the Howling up the top. I was worried because I do like this in order in terms of the American Werewolf in London, then the Company of Wolves, but I think let's just keep it like that. Everything else really isn't in order, but I do think that the Howling does deserve credit where the credit's due, and when I look at all of these other films, it is definitely above Let's Go. What do I think about the 1941 Wolfman? You know what? Let's let him have it. Let's let him sit there. If anything, I might put Trick or Treat up here, but it just didn't wow me enough. I love the finished look of the wolf, but the transformation scene doesn't wow me enough to put it above that. It's effective for a short film for sure. Okay, I'm happy with that. Let me know your thoughts down below. I know you're gonna. So much cool news about new horror movies out lately. There's been so many updates. If you missed it, I updated my most anticipated. I added a bunch more, I think like 20 more films to my list. So there's a part 1 and part 2 of that if you haven't checked it out. Also, I went and saw The Wolfman and I did a review for that. And my patrons can now enjoy a spoiler chat on that video. If you have seen the movie and you want spoilers, it's up on the Patreon, which is always linked down below. I hope you're having a fantastic day and I'll talk to you all very soon. Stay safe and stay spooky. Bye, friends.